Ari, we were talking with Jesse about this because one of the fundamental reasons for the invention of Bitcoin is to skirt this kind of monetary censorship. And yet, here we see all of the companies that have been involved in it for the first decade of its life following Treasury orders. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It does for a number of reasons. Look, I think the way the U.S. Treasury was thinking about these sanctions is they were going after what they saw as the chief money laundering tool for North Korea's cyber criminals. And, we've seen these huge hacks in the crypto space over the last year or so, which in many respects, when they involve North Korea, moved this issue from sort of a fraud and financial crime issue, which is still very serious, to really a national security issue. And I think that the challenge now that we're seeing in the space is, and this was to Jesse's point, look, we have to figure out ways to go after illicit actors like North Korea who are taking advantage of decentralized tools, but at the same time not affect what he called sort of, legitimate users, because there is, more and more need to have transactional privacy as we move into sort of this new open financial system. So it's really figuring out sort of how to walk that line between stopping bad actors from using sort of, these tools and allowing legitimate users to continue to use them.
I just want to point out it doesn't get any more private than duffel bags full of Benjamins. I mean, laundering dollars is surely much easier because you don't have a blockchain to trace it all. I get that Tornado kind of helps people make the blockchain less effective, but what do you think about a company like Tether, which has been resistant to Treasury's demands to freeze any assets that have touched Tornado? Does that make sense, or do they have to do it?
It does make sense, and I'll tell you why. Look, I think there's a couple ways if you are a crypto company, and that means a stablecoin issuer like Tether, a DeFi protocol, like some of the ones that have been involved in some of the conversations around this. Look, you have to, if you are a U.S. person or a U.S. entity, you have to abide by OFAC sanctions. It's very black and white. And even Tether, what Tether is saying in their statements is, hey, look, we're going to block the addresses that are on what they call the SDN list, the specially designated national list, the OFAC sanctions list. We're going to block those addresses. But what we're not going to do is go ahead and take a step further and block addresses that have transacted with sanctioned addresses. And I think sort of Tether is saying, look, and a lot of the crypto industry is in line with this, and that is, look, what we need before we take that next step is more guidance from OFAC, more guidance from Treasury and regulators. So what to be clear, Tether is not saying, hey, we're not going to abide by sanctions, but they are saying we're not going to take that extra step to block addresses that have transacted with sanctioned addresses. And I think this goes to sort of crypto businesses right now are all trying to navigate. And at TRM, this is what we do. We've been working with them to do this, to come up with what is their risk appetite and how can they use data to make informed decisions about which addresses to block.
Ari, you underscored the need for privacy in this sphere as well. For someone who's perhaps not as familiar with Tornado Cash and the uses for it, compare and contrast, if you will, the U.S. banking system, for example, and the privacy associated there, or I should say lack thereof, when it comes to things like tracking money laundering, for example. How does Tornado Cash or the concept rank in that?
No, look, I love the question. I was a prosecutor at the US Department of Justice for about 11 years, and I can tell you that, there's no TRM to trace both cash smuggling and networks of hawalas and shell companies and high-value art. And I think, look, what the blockchain allows for is unprecedented visibility on financial transactions. It allows you to follow the funds. And on the one hand, that's a great thing, right? It allows financial crime investigators to follow the money in ways that were impossible before. But on the flip side, look, as more and more transactions are done in an open way, people are going to have more and more reason to have to want privacy in those transactions. Look, eventually, hopefully, we'll all be paid in crypto, right? You don't necessarily want Bloomberg to know every transaction you do with that paycheck, right? There's going to be reasons why you're going to want to have privacy more and more. And there are tools like Tornado Cash that allow for that. The problem is, again, these same tools are being used by illicit actors like North Korea, who also want more privacy in their transactions. And that's the fine line that we're seeing regulators and crypto businesses try to walk today. And yeah, please.
Well, first of all, I think that's fascinating, and we could go on about that for a long time. But it also makes me think about CBDCs. does the U.S. drag its feet on issuing a central bank digital currency?
I think this is happening globally. I think certainly the U.S. is obviously taking its time. We've seen this conversation from the executive order and from the Fed about spending time studying a CBDC. But I think the reality is the U.S. is not ready today to say, hey, look, CBDC is even the right move here. Compared to stable coins and cryptocurrencies and other types of assets, in the private space. So I don't know that it's as much dragging its feet as really kind of trying to study and understand the issue. I think there's a narrative that sort of the U.S. is behind China, in particular in sort of the CBDC space race, if you will. And I think the reality is still based on the hegemony of the U.S. dollar, and that could change. I think the U.S. is sort of very much still in the game, but it really has to decide whether or not it's a country that's going to move forward with a CBDC. And I think that's a very much we'll see situation at the moment.